What's up, internet friends? How you guys doing? This is Bullet Holes in the Bible, and I'm Justin, and today we're going to be covering a topic that I think is very fascinating and perhaps even challenging both for modern Christians and agnostic atheists, and even more so for those who consider themselves Messianic Jewish followers or Hebrew roots or Torah observant followers, etc. I think that regardless of which of those spheres you sort of fall into, today's information will be covering some stuff that I think all of us should ponder and at least question and try and find answers to if they even exist. But before I jump in, I just want to quickly say I apologize for the mess behind me. We're rearranging some things. I just built my daughter's new bed yesterday. Had to move some stuff out into the hallway. So I'm up here in the upstairs landing at the family computer, and I kind of put together a little outline here that I want to cover for you guys to walk you through step by step. So what we will be covering specifically is how Jesus contradicts the Torah. And not only in the way that he speaks, the things he says specifically that we're going to point out that I think might even be surprising to people who have even studied this before, but also in his very nature, in his existence, how he does or does not fit into the narrative of the Tanakh or the Old Testament scriptures. We're going to look into that today, and I'm going to show you some reasons why I don't think he fits into the narrative. And I think his character, which was developed by the 1st, 2nd century Greco-Roman Jews, his character actually intentionally speaks against the Torah to clarify that this is a new religion that is now separating itself from traditional Hebrew theologies and Jewish theologies. I think this is important specifically for Christians in the mainstream, because we can see that if Jesus Christ wasn't the perfect sacrifice, then he couldn't have fulfilled this spiritual idea that they think he did. You see, most mainstream Christians believe that Jesus came and completed and fulfilled the Torah, and he lived a perfect and sinless life according to Torah, because we know sin is transgression of the Torah according to the book of John. So he would have had to live according to the Torah perfectly in order to become a spotless lamb, another issue that we'll point out later on in this video. In order to become a spotless lamb and then become a sin sacrifice for the sins of the world. Now, I'm going to detail why there's a lot of problems with this idea, not just him being perfect, but also him being the perfect sacrifice according to Torah. I don't think that fits whatsoever. And I think this idea is also important to Torah observant Christians, even more importantly, because Torah observant Christians or Hebrew roots Christians and Messianic Jewish people understand the value of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. They understand the value of the Torah, how it was a requirement for the prophets of the Old Testament to keep and follow Torah in order to be a prophet. Same with the leaders, the patriarchs, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, on and on. But all the way, this really leads all the way down to the trail of Jesus Christ showing up, or Yeshua, or Yahusha, or whatever you would like to call him. To me, it makes no difference. I know to some of you it does, but in idea and in concept, it really does not. But once we have a deeper understanding of the Torah, which many of you guys do, and you know as well that I do, because I studied Torah very deeply for 3 or 4 years, being a Torah observant Hebrew roots Messianic Jew myself, studying and understanding the Torah is initially what brought me to a place of starting to question the New Testament in the first place, because it really doesn't jive when you get to the meat and potatoes of it. And we're going to be talking about this and how the concepts that I'm going to discuss today ultimately led me away from New Testament theology. Now, I'm not going to get into Old Testament theology and how I was led away from that ultimately as well in this video, but I'm sure we'll talk about that in the future. Now, if you're joining me from TikTok, by the way, I am also on TikTok at Bullet Holes in the Bible. Thank you for leaping over and checking me out on YouTube. If you're already subscribed to me on YouTube and you aren't following me on TikTok, make sure you check me out over there. We talk about a lot of different theological topics and doctrinal topics pertaining to Christianity. So let's just dive straight into this. And first, I want to talk to you about Jesus' own contradictions right in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. He states that we must keep the law in every way, in every detail, but then he goes on later in the same chapter to explain that he's changing it entirely. Let's take a quick look at this. Okay, so this is Matthew 5, verses 17 through 20. Let me see if my video is working here. It looks like it's frozen or something. Well, let's just take that off for now. We don't need me on the screen here. Matthew 5, verses 17 through 20, it says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of heaven." Now, this is a very specific group of verses that the Torah observant Christians really love, myself included when I was Torah observant. It basically explains here, Jesus is saying that it's important to keep the Torah. The Torah will not change. It doesn't pass away. Until the earth passes away, it will continue to exist. And since the earth is still here, it still exists. Also, he says, anyone who sets aside the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be least in the kingdom of heaven. And I know for me and my cohorts, we did not want to be the least in the kingdom of heaven. We wanted to be considered great in the kingdom of heaven, which it says to be great in the kingdom of heaven, you would practice and teach these commands. So that is what we did and what I did specifically when I was in Torah. So jumping in a little bit farther now, again, this is such a huge chunk of scripture that a lot of Christians or Torah observant Christians love to point to prove that Jesus actually kept Torah and promoted Torah. And likewise, they'll take many of the writings of Paul in its very small, fractured context and say the same thing, that Paul also encouraged keeping the Torah, etc., etc. But as we get farther into today's study, we're going to see that Jesus later in the same chapter actually contradicts his very own words by speaking against the Torah and changing up the laws of the Torah right there in the same chapter. So it's pretty contradictory stuff, pretty interesting. So let me just go ahead and set up the next one here. And we're going to start listing off some big examples I've seen where Jesus literally contradicts the Torah, not just in the laws, but also in its concept. The first one I want to share with you guys is from Numbers, chapter 21, verses 5 through 6. And it says, this is about the Israelites after they've left Egypt through the Exodus and all this stuff. It says, they spoke against God, the Israelites, and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. So the Israelites were literally questioning Moses and God, saying, "Why did you guys bring us out here to starve? We need food, we're hungry, and this isn't working for us." And his response was to send venomous snakes to bite them and punish them and get mad at them, or to teach them that they should be trusting God more, etc., etc. But listen to what Jesus says in Luke chapter 11, verse 11. He says, "Which of you fathers, if your son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead?" Do you see the contradiction here? Literally, Jesus is saying that a good father wouldn't give his sons a snake just simply for asking for food. So I know this isn't the biggest bombshell moment of the video here or this entire study, but we can already see that it sounds like the character of Jesus as portrayed by the New Testament authors is sort of speaking negatively about the way in which God the Father or Yahweh treated the Israelites in the Old Testament. Let me go ahead and set up the next one and we'll continue. Next, Jesus contradicts Exodus chapter 20, verses 12, right here. Exodus 20, verse 12, this is the fifth commandment. It says, honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. So again, I think you guys are already familiar with that commandment to honor your father and mother. But let's see what Jesus says in Luke chapter 14, verse 26. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. So I'm sure there's many people out there already screaming, oh, but the context. I get it. The context, you can make the context be whatever you like it to be. But essentially, God is saying to honor and cherish your father and mother, be respectful to them, and to do what they tell you to do. And in fact, there's punishments in the Torah for children who disobey their parents. And Jesus here is telling us that it's better to hate your father and mother, and even your brothers and sisters, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just two quick examples, but let's continue through this. I'm going to try and make this video as short as I can to just not belabor the point any farther than I need to. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 13, God commands people, the Israelites, to swear by his name. It says, fear the Lord your God, serve him only, and take your oaths in his name. So this doesn't seem like it's a recommendation. It just seems like it's what he's telling people to do. This is how laws are extrapolated out of the Tanakh, is by taking his words, especially in Deuteronomy, which is a law-filled book, and applying those to our daily living. So let's see what Jesus actually said in contrast to this in Matthew 5:34 through 37. Jesus said, but I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is a city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So Jesus says anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So would he be implying that Yahweh here is the evil one, since he is telling them to swear by his name for their oaths? Again, when you just have one or two things like this, it's no big deal. But when it goes on and on and on, you start realizing, again, this Jesus character is super contradictory to the Torah. This is just a few examples. Here's another one. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 19 through 21. This is from the Torah again. It says, then do to the false witnesses as that witness intended to do to the other party. You must purge the evil from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. Show no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. So this is, in the Torah, God explaining that it's important to make sure that people are punished for their transgressions and their sins against others. Otherwise, everything will just run rampant. It says you must purge the evil from among you, so that the rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. In other words, you got to spank your kids, according to this text. This is essentially what's happening here. You got to spank your kids to ensure that they learn, and the other kids learn, that when they're disobedient, there's a punishment for this, and they can't just run amok, otherwise there'll be total chaos. So this law, making very much sense according to traditional biblical understanding. But what does Matthew chapter 5 say about this, both in verse 38 through 39 and in verses 43 through 44? First, in Matthew 5, verse 38, again, this is right after Jesus explained that the Torah will never pass away and no one should teach against it. But here he is immediately teaching against it. This is 18 verses later. Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Again, here you go. He's quoting Deuteronomy directly. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. So he's literally quoting the Torah here and saying, do not listen to this advice. Do not do this. But then later, again, same chapter, Matthew 5, verses 43 through 44, he says, you have heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So this is sort of a double whammy here. Jesus is saying not to retaliate, not to punish, not to hold people accountable, essentially, but instead just to pray for the people who treat you poorly, who sin against you and curse you, etc., etc. This is completely contrary to the ways of the Torah, which was not just some law for holiness so that the Israelite people could draw closer to God in some spiritual way, but the Torah was also a very literal, tangible governance system for a community who needed laws to survive both in the wilderness and in the Levant region. So again, we see Jesus directly contradicting the Torah, word for word. He even quotes it word for word to make sure his point is cleanly accepted. Let's move on to the next one. In the Old Testament, in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, it says, if a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. That's a pretty obvious one. I think many of you are already aware of this law. But again, what does Jesus say about the same thing? Let's check it out. John chapter 8, verse 3 through 11. There's a quick story here that many of you may already be familiar with. It says, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, which makes perfect sense, by the way, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees were always critical of Jesus according to the narrative because he was constantly teaching against and breaking the laws, which is exactly why they're on his ass all the time. It says they brought a woman caught in adultery, okay? Caught in adultery. She was an adulteress. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery, and the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Now, you see why they would have a basis for accusing him? If he doesn't agree with the law of Moses, then he's teaching against the law of Moses, and they would have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left. With the woman standing there, Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Okay, so straight up we have an adulteress who broke the Torah. We have the Torah-keeping Jewish people saying, look, this is what we're supposed to do in order to remain holy, in order to be a set-apart nation for God who is our standard. What do you think we should do in a situation like this? And Jesus literally teaches against the Torah, saying that they shouldn't condemn her because they've also sinned. But here's the rub with that. First of all, he's just blatantly contradicting Torah, no question about it. But second of all, the actual logic behind that little deal, it makes no sense. Every person on earth, according to this biblical standard, has sinned, and that was the case even back during the time of the Israelites wandering in the desert. Certainly, Moses and his leaders, because he had leaders on leaders on leaders working for him, certainly all of them made mistakes here and there. And even as parents today, we can relate. We have children. We make mistakes. We don't do everything perfectly according to the Bible, etc. But does that mean we should never discipline our children when they require discipline? Does this mean that we should let them get away and run amok with everything because we've also made mistakes in the past? Of course not. It's ridiculous and ludicrous. we, with our experience, have to try and train our children in the way they should go, right? The Bible also says, spare the rod, spoil the child, etc. Now, I personally do not ascribe to all of these type of ideas anymore. But biblically speaking, Jesus doesn't make any sense here. He's saying, if you've ever made a mistake, well, then you can't punish somebody else. Well, okay, well, then chaos should run amok. Anarchy should ensue, and you should just let adulteresses keep adulteressing, and everybody else can just do whatever they want now, because we all have sin, and so none of us can cast stones. But if that was the case, then if this was a Christian nation that was based off of that idea, we would have no prison system, we would have no death penalty, we would have no fines or levies or anything for any citizen ever, because Jesus said, hey, if you've messed up, then what, you can't say nothing. Just ludicrous. And again, most importantly, a direct contradiction of the Torah without question. So let me go ahead and move on to another example. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14. And let me go ahead and pull up these other two real quick as well while I'm sitting here. Okay, here we go. First, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14. This is also, this is the law about the Sabbath. It says, "For the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do." Pretty cut and dry stuff here. If you guys are familiar with the Ten Commandments, you already know that this is one of those commandments, to honor the Sabbath, not work on the Sabbath. And specifically, it explains more in depth what work is later, and we'll look at that in just a second. But first, let's go over to John chapter 5, verse 8 through 9. And this is after Jesus had healed a man on the Sabbath, which again, that alone would I don't know if that would be considered work, just touching someone and saying, be healed. But here's the rub. Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. Now, later in this narrative, you find out that the Pharisees started questioning this man, like, who healed you? Who told you to get up and walk? Who told you to carry your mat around? And they were pretty upset with the fact that Jesus had instructed this man to carry a burden, to carry a load on the Sabbath day. Why would they be so irritated about that? Well, it's pretty obvious. Right here in Jeremiah 17, 22 through 21, it says, "This is what the Lord says, be careful not to carry a load on the Sabbath day or bring it through the gates of Jerusalem. Do not bring a load out of your houses or do any work on the Sabbath, but keep the Sabbath day holy as I commanded your ancestors." So again, Christians who have a very shallow understanding, if any whatsoever, of the Torah don't understand why this is such a big deal. They think, the Pharisees were just always nitpicking him and trying to find things wrong with him. Well, look, when someone starts subtly speaking against Torah with some of the things he's implying and saying, which he does all through Matthew 5, you start to open your ears a little bit more and go, what is this guy really teaching here? It sounds like he's teaching against the punishment for adultery. It sounds like he's saying a lot of things that contradict Moses and the law of Moses. And here he just told someone to carry a load on the Sabbath. This is completely contradictory to Torah, and of course they would be upset about that. It makes perfect sense. It's no surprise to me. But again, if that was the only thing that ever happened and the only evidence we had for Jesus contradicting the Torah, then again, I would say, okay, well, maybe it's a mistranslation or something, which, by the way, that's a whole nother topic. I mean, every Bible scholar understands how the Bible was put together, piecemeal, retranslated, changed, removed, added, all kinds of stuff. So certainly the translations are definitely messed up. But again, that's a whole nother topic. Let's go on to the next one. It says here in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 1 through 24. And let me pull up Matthew 5 again as well. Okay. This is the blessings for obedience, and it talks specifically about rains. and the benefits and the fruits that come from keeping the Torah. Let's take a look at it here. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28, blessings for obedience. It says, "And if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above the nations of all the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, and if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be the basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall be you when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall come against you one way and flee before you 7 ways," although this didn't happen in Job. "The Lord will command the blessing on you in your barns and in all that you undertake. And he will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. And all the people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you." Never happened. "And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground, within the land that the Lord swore your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hands. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow." It goes on here to say the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God. Okay, let's go down a little bit farther here and look for the curses. It says, "But if you will not obey the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall be you in the city, and cursed shall be you in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, the increase of your herds and the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out." It gets better here. It says, "The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and frustration in all you undertake to do, until you are destroyed and perish quickly on account of the evil of your deeds, because you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the pestilence stick to you until he has consumed you off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, and with fever, inflammation, and fiery heat, and with drought, and with blight, and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. And the heavens over your head shall be bronze, and the earth under you shall be iron. And the Lord will make the rain of your land powder. From heaven dust shall come down on you until you are destroyed." So essentially, the biggest key takeaway here is, first of all, just understanding the blessings and the curses of the law is something that just generally everyone needs to see. According to God's promises, he's going to provide certain types of blessings for you if you keep the Torah. And if you don't, then he's going to give you certain types of curses. Of course, we don't see evidence for either the blessing or the curse in any of his people at all, except through the biblical narrative. But the biggest key point was he said that he will give you rain in its season if you follow the commandments. And if you don't, then he will not. He will turn your rain into a dust bowl. But what does Jesus say about this? Jesus says, I should probably go to 44 through 45 so we can get a little bit more context here. Oops. Let's see. 44 through 45. Let's do that. "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust." So literally directly contradicting what the Torah just told us about the blessings and for obedience and the curses for disobedience. Jesus says, he gives rain to everyone, whether they're just or unjust. So again, if you are a Torah-keeping Jew or Hebrew or whatever you want to call it in the first century, and you heard him saying this type of stuff, you would be like, what is he talking about? He's literally speaking against what the Torah has taught us, right? Moving forward, All right, the law prescribes a man to write a certificate of divorce according to Deuteronomy. Let me pull this up. And we're going to compare another Torah point to Jesus. Here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1 through 4. Now, this is interesting because this Torah law is actually more lenient than Jesus's update of this law, if you want to call it that, or his adjustment to this law. But we'll see that. These are laws concerning divorce. It says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Now, this is about like a remarriage, adultery, essentially, but the bigger point is here that it is lawful to write a certificate of divorce, and then it is also lawful for a woman to remarry according to the Torah. And this is something that's pretty much common knowledge to those who study and keep Torah. And yeah, we see examples of this. I mean, even Abraham sent away one of his wives. I mean, this is something that we see in Scripture. So what does Jesus say about divorce and remarriage? He actually has multiple things to say. First, in Matthew, verse 5, 31 through 32, again, Matthew 5 again, after he said, the law shall not pass away, here he is once again contradicting it. Verse 31, he says, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. So he's quoting the Torah. But I say to you, which means here comes a contradiction, that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So Jesus is saying that she committed adultery and the new dude committed adultery in this scenario. He's just like, no, that's no bueno. That's straight up adultery. I have another example here that I wanted to share with you. Here it is. It's Mark chapter 10, verse 11 and 12. Let's pull that up. Again, Jesus talking in the book of Mark, it says, and he said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Now, in this scenario, he's not even talking about like, except for sexual immorality, except for this or whatever. No, he's just straight up saying, if you divorce your wife and marry another one, you're committing adultery. And likewise, if she gets divorced and remarries, then she's committing adultery. And it's just all totally not okay. So again, this is a direct violation and contradiction to what the Torah teaches, as we have cleanly and clearly witnessed. Okay, moving on. I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 more points I really want to discuss, and then we'll wrap up. I'm trying not to make this too long, so you can just get the gist of my points. These are just a few of them. We could do part 2, 3, and 4 of this. I'm sure there's so much of this type of stuff. Just going through Matthew 5 alone is an exercise in reading anti-Torah rhetoric from Jesus. But all right, the next one, it says, this is from Deuteronomy 18, verse 10, again from the Torah, and we'll pull it up, and then we'll also pull up a few more: Jeremiah 19, Ezekiel 23, and Deuteronomy 18. So we're going to do a couple of them here. All right, starting in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10. It says, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer. So straight up saying this one's kind of a little bit more nuanced, to be honest. So I'll just be straight up with you. But the idea here is we see many examples of God saying he doesn't like it when people sacrifice their sons and daughters as offerings. And he considers that divination, it's in the same league and in practice of divination, fortune telling, omens, sorcery, etc., etc. I mean, you could say that Jesus did some of that stuff with his magic tricks as well, but that's not the point. The point is, none of you should sacrifice your son or daughter, right? Let's go to the next one. Is Jeremiah. We'll close that one here. Jeremiah 19, 4-5. It says, because the people have forsaken me and have profaned this place by making offerings in it to other gods whom neither they nor their fathers nor the kings of Judah have known, and because they have filled this place with the blood of innocents. Isn't that what Jesus was? Was he innocent? And have built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as offerings to Baal. So again, people burning their sons as offerings. He hates it, which I did not command or decree, nor did it come even into my mind. So he's like, I didn't even think to do some crazy stuff like that, killing my son and filling my temple with the blood of innocent people. Yahweh is saying, I would never do that. Don't do that. That's disgusting. Let's go to the next one. Ezekiel 23, 37-39. It says, for they have committed adultery, and blood is on their hands. With their idols they have committed adultery, and they have even offered up to them for food the children whom they had borne. In other words, they're sacrificing their kids again. Moreover, this they have done to me. They have defiled my sanctuary on the same day and profaned my Sabbaths. For when they had slaughtered their children, there again, in sacrifice to their idols, on the same day they came into my sanctuary to profane it. And behold, this is what they did in my house. So again, God not seeming too happy with this practice of sacrificing children. Now you could say, oh, he doesn't like it when you sacrifice children to other gods, but are you really saying that he does like it when you sacrifice children? I don't think so. It's not what we see in the Tanakh. Deuteronomy 18, 10-12. Verse 10, it says, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead, so speaks to the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. Now, this is kind of a side note, but since we're already here, me and you, we're talking about this. I mean, honestly, these are things that Jesus did. He tells people their future, right? He did sorcery, magic. He was able to speak to the dead and raise the dead, right? And God says he doesn't like this stuff. This is an abomination to the Lord. And because of that, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. So just a few more examples here of glaring contradictions in the things Jesus does and says and the Torah. But we have a few more examples, so let's continue forward. This one is from Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 19-20. I'm also going to pull up 1 Peter 2:24 and 1 John 4:10. All right, first we have Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 19-20. It says, yet you say, why should not the Son suffer for the iniquity of the Father? So basically this is talking about whether or not people will take on the sins of other people, but specifically fathers and sons in this situation. But it says, why should not the Son suffer for the iniquity of the Father? When the Son has done what is just and right, and has been careful to observe all my statutes, he shall surely live. The soul who sins shall die. This is the main precept we don't want to ignore. The Son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the Father, nor the Father suffer for the iniquity of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. So according to the Tanakh and God's righteous decrees, everyone has to take on their own sin, and it won't be handed off to someone else. If you're wicked, you'll be punished for it. If you're righteous, you'll get rewarded for it. There's no transfer of righteousness from one person to another. But what does the New Testament say? First, we'll look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 24. It says, he himself, talking about Jesus Christ, bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. Again, contradicting that same idea. What about 1 John 4:10? It says, in this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be a propitiation for our sins, which means an atonement to appease God on our behalf for our sins. So here we have the Old Testament saying that's not how it works. People die in their own sin. They die in their own righteousness, and there's no transfer like that. But the New Testament, of course, is all about that transfer, isn't it? The Christian religion completely is about that one precept at its core, at its foundation. So, again, glaring issues. Next, Leviticus chapter 17. We're going to talk about eating blood. I think this is really interesting. This is one I just noticed a couple days ago. I've never noticed before, so it's pretty interesting to me. But here we go. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 10 through 12. Laws against eating blood. If any one of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among them that eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Therefore I have said it to the people of Israel, no person among you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. Okay, what does Jesus teach? Mark 14, 23 through 24. Many of you guys know this as the Last Supper, otherwise known as a Eucharist ritual, which, by the way, Eucharist rituals are predated. They predate Christianity. They existed before Christianity, so Christianity was just borrowing this as another motif, as they often do. But here we go, Mark 14, it says, and he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank it. And he said to them, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. So Jesus is instructing them to drink his blood. In fact, if you understand Catholicism, some still believe in transubstantiation, which means they believe when they eat their little cracker and drink their little grape juice, it literally changes into his flesh and blood in their stomach. Transubstantiation. That totally contradicts what the Torah teaches about this. Secondly, people might say, oh, well, he was just saying it's like his blood. It's not, they weren't actually drinking his blood. But aren't Christians the same ones who also say that it's the spirit and like the intention of the heart that matters? It's so interesting. They're like, it doesn't matter like what you do. It matters like what your heart is behind it and things like that. Okay, well, the heart behind Jesus's ritual here was to make them think and feel as if they're drinking his blood. Again, contradicting the Torah and really initiating them into his own little cult, ensuring that they're not going to keep Torah, but instead follow him, because there's definitely a big difference between the two. So, drinking blood, really interesting. Okay, two more here, and we'll wrap up. This is from Leviticus 17, 8 through 9, and Matthew 27 again. Matthew 27. Here we go. And this is about offering burnt offerings and sacrifices. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I think this is something that cannot be overlooked, no matter what you think your excuse is for the other things mentioned so far. This can't be overlooked. It's just too heavy. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 8 through 9, it says, and you shall say to them, any one of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among them, who offers a burnt offering or sacrifice, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it to the Lord, that man shall be cut off from his people. So this literally means, and as a prior Torah follower myself, I had friends arguing with each other about whether or not they could do different types of sacrifices in their backyard because of this verse specifically, and other verses similar to it, which says you don't do sacrifices outside of the prescribed time and place that God tells us to do them. And if you do, it says that you'll be cut off from his people. So it's kind of a heavy thing to consider if you really want to do a sacrifice. But Matthew 27 says, as they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, it doesn't mean tent of meeting, they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. So quite clearly, Jesus, according to the narrative, was crucified at Golgotha, not anywhere near a tent of meeting or a temple or a priest, not anywhere close to the prescribed place where sacrifices are supposed to take place. And therefore, according to Leviticus, that would make Jesus and his followers cut off, since they were literally performing an inappropriate sacrifice at the wrong place. But it gets even better than that. And this is what I really want to wrap up with, is how clearly, according to Torah, Jesus could not have been sacrifice appropriate to Yahweh based on the Torah, just straight up. So we're going to look at Leviticus chapter 4, and we're going to do verses 3 through 12. Let me open all these up real quick. 13 through 21, 22 through 26, 27 through 31, and 32 through 33. So what I'm about to explain to you are what the sin offering requirements are based on who you are as a person trying to get atonement for your sins according to the Torah. Again, Jesus was supposed to be the fulfillment of the Torah, the completion of the Torah. He himself was supposed to follow it perfectly so that he could be a perfect sacrifice, yada, yada. We're already seeing that there's problems there, but this really simplifies it, in my opinion. So if a priest sins, according to Leviticus chapter 4, a priest specifically, we're just going to look at verses 3 through 12 here. Let me pull it up. So we're going to go over a priest, common people. Let's see, what are the categories I got here? We got priest, community, leader, common people, and then a lamb. All right. So if it is the anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on all the people, then he shall offer for the sin that he has committed a bull from the herd without blemish to the Lord for a sin offering. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting, which we said location matters, before the Lord, and lay his hand on the head of the bull and kill the bull before the Lord. So he has to lay his hand on the head of the bull and then kill the bull. And then the anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull and bring it into the tent of meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle part of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. Very specific requirements here. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before the Lord that is in the tent of meeting, and all the rest of the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And I'm going to finish this part at least once. It says the same thing multiple times in these examples, but I'm going to finish this part at least once because to me it matters. It says, and all the fat of the bull of the sin offering he shall remove from it, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them and at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver he shall remove with the kidneys, just as these are taken from the ox of the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offering. So they have to burn these liver and fat pieces on the altar of burnt offering. But the skin of the bull and all of its flesh with its head, its legs, entrails, and its dung, all the rest of the bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, to an ash heap, and shall burn it up on a fire of wood. On an ash heap it shall be burned up. So before I even go to the next example, tell me, did any of these things take place with Jesus as a sacrifice? Was his fat ripped out and his liver and entrails and all this stuff? Was he burnt outside the city? Did a priest take blood into the sanctuary and dip his fingers in it and sprinkle it and all this stuff? Absolutely not. All right, here's the one for the whole congregation. Again, this is Leviticus 4. If the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, now this, to me, this would be where we should fall in. Like Jesus should have probably fulfilled this one because it's like the whole congregation. He died for the sins of the whole world, right? It says, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they do any one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize their guilt. When the sin which they have committed becomes known, the assembly shall offer a bull from the herd for a sin offering and bring it in front of the tent of meeting. Again, they should lay their hands on it, kill the bull before the Lord, blah, blah, blah. The rest of this is very similar. They got to pour out the blood at the base of the altar, use their fingers to sprinkle it, and whip the fat out and burn it outside the camp. It's very similar. So this is if the whole congregation of Israel sins. What about, let's see, we'll go to when a leader sins, doing unintentionally any one of the things that they, commandments of the Lord, his God, ought not to be done, and realizes his guilt or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring his offering a goat, a male without blemish. Okay, same thing. Lay his hand on the head of the goat, kill it outside of the tent of meeting, da-da-da-da-da. All right. What about a common person? This could be another one. Like maybe we're all common people. This should be the sacrifice maybe that we fall into, right? Now, if they sin, they shall bring for his offering a female goat without blemish. Same thing with the blood, same thing with the fat he shall remove, burned outside the camp, blah, 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 blah. And then last, but certainly not least, it says, if you want to bring a lamb, if someone decides to bring a lamb instead of a goat for whatever reason, it says, if he brings a lamb as his offering for a sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish. Female lamb without blemish. Same thing. Lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill it for a sin offering in the place where they killed the burnt offering. So literally, Jesus could not have been, according to the Torah that we can all very clearly read, he could not have been any fulfillment of any kind of sin sacrifice for any person, a leader, a congregation, anything. For a common person, he wasn't a goat, he wasn't a bull, and let's be honest, he wasn't even a lamb. But even if we put this symbol on him, like, oh, he's the Lamb of God and all this stuff, well, he wasn't actually a lamb, right? We didn't see him with, like, no one thinks he had fur and was like walking around the meadows eating grass and making weird noises. He was a human. He was half man, half God, just like Dionysus, Romulus, many Achilles, many others, right? He could not have been a sin sacrifice according to the Torah. He could not have fulfilled God's righteous requirement for a sin sacrifice to be the propitiation of our sins, because God doesn't like human sacrifice, as we discussed earlier in this. He detests it, right? People offering their sons and daughters and all this stuff. And he just didn't fit the description. If you bring the wrong sacrifice to get your sin atonement offerings done, it's not going to cut it. God will not be pleased. And so we have a lot of issues with the sacrificial system just by itself. But clearly, Jesus was none of the things required for a sacrifice, nor was his body appropriately used as a sacrifice according to the law. He was not the correct type of sacrifice, even going against God's disdain for human sacrifices. He was killed in the wrong manner, so he's killed the wrong way. He was killed in the wrong location. His blood wasn't placed on the horns of the altar by a priest. His fat was not removed and burnt on top of the food offerings presented to the Lord, required for a sin or atonement offering. Additionally, Jesus, aka Yeshua, Yahusha, Jesus, or any other name that you like to ascribe to this guy, violated the Torah both in his teachings and in practice, making him tainted. In other words, not a spotless sacrifice. Last, the Torah warns about false prophets who would lead people away from God, specifically mentioning that a prophet pushing messages contrary to God's law should be purged from among them by death. This is in Deuteronomy 13 and 18. I'm going to quote this for you. Actually, pull this up. Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5. And Deuteronomy 18, 20 through 22. Okay. It says here, let me pull a screen share for you. This is Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5. If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or a wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, "Let us follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them," you must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is the Lord your God you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him. Serve him and hold fast to him. That prophet or dreamer must be put to death for inciting rebellion against the Lord your God, which is what you're doing when you teach against the Torah, who brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. That prophet or dreamer tried to turn you from the way of the Lord your God commanded you to follow. You must purge the evil from among you. And now let's look. So straight up, keep the commandments. Don't let anyone tell you not to keep the commandments. Don't let anyone try and cause a rebellion against God and his Torah, essentially. If a prophet tries to do that, then you should kill him, even if he does magic. So Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 20 through 22. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. That's Jesus. He's definitely speaking things that don't jive with Torah and Yahweh of the Old Testament would have not commanded. You may say to yourselves, how can we know when a message has not been spoken by the Lord? If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously, and so do not be alarmed. Now, I think it should be pretty obvious to anyone who's, awake and has read the New Testament at all, but Jesus is a failed prophet as well. Not only was he teaching against the Torah, it doesn't fit into the Torah, and the whole idea of him contradicts Torah, really. But quite literally, I literally lost my point. I shouldn't be reading my screen while I'm trying to talk at the same time. Quite literally, he predicted that people standing with him, the apostles, would not taste death. Some of them would not taste death until he returned in his kingdom. Many people become preterists or partial preterists for this reason. They think Jesus already returned because he said that he would. And if you're literalistic, or as much as you can be with the words of Jesus and the supposed writers of the New Testament, then that's the gist of what you'll get. It makes it quite clear that prophets whose claims do not come to pass should be put to death and ignored, bringing to mind the failed prophecy of Jesus that some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. This is Matthew 16:28. We'll pull it real quick. Truly I tell you, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Again, a failed prophecy that was 2,000 years ago-ish, if that was really what he said and it was really recorded appropriately at the right time. Those guys are all dead. Everyone he was talking to, if he was real, all tasted death, and they're all dead, and Jesus' kingdom did not come. He's a failed prophet. And if you understand how prophecy works according to the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Old Testament, you see that that's not how it works anyways. Prophets come to give a message to a specific people, and that message is implemented and carried out immediately, and prophecies come true immediately. But this idea that these prophets would give this prophecy that's supposed to come to pass in some future 2,000-year date, without even explicitly making that clear, is just absolutely ridiculous, because that's not even how prophets operate in the Old Testament. All right, so the character of Jesus as he is depicted in the New Testament was clearly a literary device, which was being used to devise a new religious construct that would break early Christian literature away from traditional Hebrew and Jewish thought, using the Hellenistic ideas of the Logos written about by Philo prior to Paul's first epistles. Again, the first writings of Jesus that we've ever seen, that we can put our hands on or talk about, and history shows, came from Paul. But it turns out Paul copied many people when developing his Jesus figure, but very specifically he copied Philo. And I'm going to have a guest on soon to talk about his findings about Philo. And it's pretty clear that Paul ripped off Philo even more than Plato and Socrates and all these guys. So that's pretty crazy. So this is why we see so many fairy tales in the New Testament, which were designed to make the reader despise the traditional understanding of Judaism with its Torah, and which is what has happened, by the way, and convince the reader to view God's righteousness through some new lens that supersedes the old ancient traditions. Again, this newer perspective predominantly inspired word for word by philosophers like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and many others. Personally, I doubt that Jesus existed at all, but even if he did, and we just so happen to have an accurate depiction of his literal words and actions, for which we have zero eyewitness testimony, by the way, he certainly could not have been the Son of God. He could not have been a prophet, and he certainly could not have been a sacrifice for any person's sin, since his very existence and character is contrary to the Torah itself. All right, guys, thank you for watching. I'm going to probably put this all into an article, and when that's ready, I'll link it below. But until next time, I hope you guys got an idea of why I think Jesus completely contradicts the Torah, doesn't fit into the narrative in any way, shape, or form, and hopefully give you some things to study, think about, and let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you think I missed, which is glaringly obvious, and maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.